I used to feel like I was improving every year. I saw continuous progress in my darts and my confidence was growing. And then it stopped. Not slowly, but almost like I hit a wall. At first I was convinced the reason had to be technical. Maybe my throw had changed without me noticing. Maybe I needed to adjust the setup. Or maybe I simply wasn't practicing enough. I was wrong. Let me tell you what was actually happening. If you look at darts conversations, improvement is framed in very practical terms. It all sounds measurable and controllable. And for a long time, I believed so as well. If I wanted to improve faster, I practiced more. There was a direct line between effort and result. Or at least that's how it seemed. What I rarely heard discussed about was the relationship between the life outside darts and the way how we train inside it. Mental energy, stress, change, uncertainty. Those things felt secondary to me, almost irrelevant to improvement, until they weren't. A few years ago, my family and I made a significant decision. We left our life in Hungary and moved to Sweden. It was a positive move, something we wanted, but it also meant rebuilding a lot from scratch. New country, new routines, new systems. Even small daily things required a lot of attention and energy, and we were on our own. At the time, I didn't think that it will affect my darts very much. If anything, I thought having darts as something stable and familiar would help me. And in the beginning it did. For a while, it was a place where I could focus on something simple and clear. Just the throw, the board and the rhythm. But gradually, something subtle changed. Without really noticing, I started expecting more from darts. If life was demanding, then darts should be the area where I feel the progress. If other things were uncertain, then at least my performance at the board should move forward. So I practiced more. I told myself that more structured sessions and more serious focus would accelerate improvement. And under normal circumstances, that approach works. But this wasn't the normal period. My mental energy was already drowned, even if I didn't consciously feel overwhelmed. There was simply less space available. And instead of being darts something that restored me, it slowly became another domain where I expected result. That's when progress began to stall. Looking back now, the signs were clear. I was putting into the hours, but the results weren't translating. Sessions felt heavier, missed darts irritated me much more than before. I began adjusting small technical details more frequently. How I hold the darts, how I release, how I step to the oki. That was the time when I started to record my throw and analyzing in slow motion. The strange thing was that I could still produce nice moments. A strong visit or a decent checkout. The ability hadn't disappeared. But the natural consistency I had built earlier was fading. Instead of flowing through a session, I felt like I was pushing through it. It wasn't a dramatic frustration. It was more quieter than that. And at that time, I translated it as a need to work harder. Only later did I understand what was actually happening. I was trying to train competitively while my mind was not in a competitive mode. There was a mismatch. My training goals were aligned with performance and growth, but my mental state was aligned with adaptation and stability. I needed something restorative, but I was demanding acceleration. That was a mistake. Progress doesn't just depend on how much you practice. It depends whether your approach matches the reality of your situation. When those two are out of sync, effort doesn't translate into improvement. If I could go back to that period, I wouldn't stop playing darts. Using darts as an anchor was actually a good decision. What I would change is the intention behind my practice. Instead of chasing performance metrics, I would purely focus on rhythm and natural movement. I would remove the expectation that every session needs to show measurable improvement. I wasn't actually playing professionally. There was no external demand that forced me to compete on higher level. So why I was imposing that pressure on myself? I think if I had allowed darts to stay the place of fluency, my natural game would have evolved more smoothly. The most interesting part came later. As our life in Sweden became more stable and predictable, something shifted internally. There was more mental space again, more clarity, less background noise. And almost immediately, my darts responded. Averages improved, doubles felt easier, the rhythm returned. I hadn't made any technical changes. I wasn't using any new equipment. The practice environment was the same. The difference was alignment. My mental state and my practice intention were finally pointing into the same direction. That period changed the way I think about improvement. I no longer assume that the same type of training is always appropriate. Instead, I try to assess where I am mentally before deciding how to practice. If life is demanding, I reduce performance pressure in darts. Not by skipping practice, but by redefining its purpose. Maybe it becomes a rhythm session or a pure repetition without expectation. When life gets lighter and more stable, that's when I introduce more competitive focus again. Then pushing makes sense. For me, sustainable progress isn't about constant acceleration. It's about timing. We often assume that progress has to be linear, especially in a hobby where effort seems to be measurable. But life isn't linear, or mental capacity shifts, or priorities shift. Sometimes the reason progress stops is not because we are doing something wrong technically, but because we are asking for something our current state cannot deliver. And forcing that gap rarely works. Sometimes the fastest way is not pushing harder, but adjusting your approach until alignment returns. That realization changed the way I practice, and in many ways the way I look at improvement altogether. Anyway, those are the thoughts I wanted to share. As always, darts is fun, watch and play every day. Cheers!